The wicked World of Warcraft is dead, or so headlines and think pieces would have us believe. You know, to say things haven't been great for WoW over the past few years would be putting it, I don't know, laughably mildly. Kyle, it seems like Final Fantasy XIV is finally like legitimately the top MMO. That's been the growing narrative since WoW's Battle for Azeroth expansion, but it seems like we're finally there now.
It's critical mass, and we're reaching it for people who don't necessarily care about their world or aesthetic anymore, and that's what's truly important. There are those who say, no, I don't like the look of Final Fantasy. I don't like the storylines they tell. I disagree with the way Square Enix shares their world, and they prefer World of Warcraft, a more Blizzard style, a more traditional mode that they have come to know over many, many years. But for players who just want to be with their friends, they're now feeling the pull. Too many people are now over playing Final Fantasy for them.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of the crux of a lot of MMOs, right? Is the social aspect, or at least it was. I mean, you and I both have played World of Warcraft for a really, really long time, off and on. You have been off for years now. I just kind of recently stopped playing. But in the early days, like my heyday, when I would argue or possibly admit that I had a problem, was probably playing way more freaking World of Warcraft than I should have been. The social side of it was huge. It was definitely the biggest part of the draw at the time. Like everyone I knew was playing World of Warcraft. It's what we would talk about when we went out for drinks back in college. It was that level of like invasive into my life. Like it was just all encompassing even when I wasn't playing the game. And in much more recent years, I would say close to like the last half decade or more, it hasn't been really a social experience for me. It's something that I just play, and yeah, I have my friends that I play with, but like my OG WoW friends, I haven't played World of Warcraft with someone from one of my original 2 guilds since the end of Wrath of the Lich King. That's how long it's been since I've played with like my original, what I would say is like my WoW family. And I've just been guild hopping and making new friends along the way, and I finally just kind of got to a point where I'm like, I think I'm done with WoW again for a while. It's been a while since I've taken a break. I am definitely on what I think is a break. I'll tell you what I'm not doing. I'm sure as shit not playing Final Fantasy. I do not like this MMO at all. I reinstalled it. Or no, I guess I had never uninstalled it. I updated it, which took it just as long as an install because, dear God, it's been a while since I've tried it. And I got back in a couple of weeks ago, and I'll say this: like, I get it. It oozes charm. It is such a charming world. And since I hadn't played in so long, I just started a new character and started over again because I didn't remember Jack, other than it's a Weebo nightmare. And so, yeah, I like playing Skyrim for the 7th time. It's like, oh, I'm back on the cart, and there's this charming drunk old man, and he's just so charming. Like the characters are so charming, and it as someone who does not play or particularly like Final Fantasy games, to me, like having jaunty music and reading text dialogue makes me think of Zelda, which is a good thing.
Yeah,
to me, that's a good thing. That's high praise. It makes me think of like the quirky town folk in Kakariko Village or whatever, and it has that kind of level of charm to it. And that would it brought me in well, and I was like, oh, maybe I've been harsh on it. And then within the first 30 minutes, I hit a loading screen like 7 times, and I was like, that's right. I hate this. I hate everything about how partitioned off this game is. But clearly I'm in the minority. Like clearly people think I'm a freaking idiot. So it's just been interesting, like watching I would say it's been interesting watching the downfall of WoW, which is really me saying it's been interesting admitting the downfall of WoW.
That's an emotional decision, and we can't have a conversation about the downfall of WoW or the transfer over to another MMO without breakup, because it is an emotional investment. Some might even go as far as to say sunk cost fallacy. it doesn't matter until you get away from the current people you're interacting with, in this case, a company. You maybe don't realize what's on the other side and what's available to you somewhere else. I do think that it is absolutely jarring. There is a lot of reading, and it's presented to you in a Zelda-like way in that it's important. When the camera is locked on in a cinematic way, and it is pausing itself till you are done reading, it is very different than saying, oh, I don't read quest text. Like, I'm not going to go read this paragraph. I'm just going to scan, find the final line. Okay, I know where to go. I got to go over the hill. And let me go do my quest, World of Warcraft style. When the game seizes you, keeps you prisoner, and then you're allowed to progress if you understand what just happened.
Yeah, I quickly started skipping like everything to just kind of see like, hey, can I go about this like I have almost 2 decades of World of Warcraft, which is skipping the hell out of everything and then picking up the pieces afterwards to try, like when I realized that I care about the story. But to me, MMOs have always been about like get the max level so I can party with my friends. And I think Final Fantasy does that fine. There's more than enough in-game indicators to let you know like where to go to do what you just accepted without paying attention to it. Like I don't think there's anything bad about that with the game, but it certainly is. I would call interruptive. It's constantly like, this is important, pay attention. I'm just like, well, I kind of don't want to, and at the same time, like I said, like at the beginning of like kind of revisiting it last week, I kind of wanted to because the characters were very charming, but it's also. It's kind of thing I look at now, and I'm just like, I think I may be done with MMOs.
Yeah,
classic kind of, like that classic MMO trapping where I'm just like, I think I may just be in my mid-30s, and I don't have the patience for this anymore.
Tab targeting is old, and it hasn't evolved.
Yeah,
there came a time there was things like Resident Evil 4. Came out amazing. We had seen over-the-shoulder cameras before. Suddenly it felt like it really worked. Dead Space grabs onto this. Batman Arkham Asylum does a massive Batman shoulder, takes up a third of your screen, but over-the-shoulder kind of starts working more. We get into counter-based play, but every Assassin's Creed starts playing this, and The Witcher becomes it. Games grab onto what works, and tab targeting has worked for a very, very long time. And in that way, we've started to see the seams. Much like graphics get old, and we look at the Mummy Returns, but even something like the Lord of the Rings Gollum, like things get rusty and they get odd, and we start to kind of push back against that. And one thing that Final Fantasy does that really distracts me is massive reticles around like every attack. Like everything is very well painted on the battlefield. But that also means I'm always being reminded that I'm playing a video game. The boss charges up his attack. He's got a sword like this, woo, and the little lasers build in front of him in this big line. Okay, so he's going to do a line attack. Like that. There's no surprise there. And I'm not getting any escapism out of this. That's one big difference between something like Diablo 3 and Diablo 2. Diablo 3 was full of these. The boss is going to slam here. And you go, oh, I'm playing a video game. Whereas older games, there wasn't, you died and you had no idea what happened. That maybe wasn't fun. But you were more immersed in the experience because you weren't constantly being reminded with outrageous spell effects that things were a circle, things were shaped this certain way. Bosses were about to do this attack. But the magic that is coming out of Final Fantasy is not necessarily gameplay related.
Yeah, that's definitely the vibe I've been getting, and I think kind of why it isn't getting its hooks into me, because it seems like the hooks come from being bought in and spending a lot of time in the game and understanding like the sense of community that it brings, the sense of community that is the reason this is where a vast majority of players are deciding to flock to.
Right. It's the social experience that this game has allowed and provided for. You'll hear things, of course, like the story. Everyone wants to tell you about how amazing the story is. And granted, it's not so different from maybe doing like a Mass Effect trilogy playthrough. Mass Effect 1, it's gonna be a bit old and crummy. It's gonna be a little. You're gonna see those seams.
Yeah, they made it okay. They made it passable recently.
Okay, yeah, but that character you meet, that guy on the cart that you talked about, he shows up later in another expansion, walks in the room, and your brain goes, "Hey, I know that guy," and he's got something that's important to tell you. You meet the twins early on, and they're kind of mystical, magical. They become heavily involved later on, and you are, in all importance to a lot of players, the center of the story. You are the chosen one, the warrior of light, and that story revolves around you in a way that World of Warcraft doesn't provide people.
I mean, World of Warcraft has certainly tried, but I never liked kind of modern WoW when they were making you kind of the center of everything, at least as much as it could, while still making like Thrall and Jaina and other characters important, right? But like, what was it? Warlords, when you had the garrison and you were the most important character in the garrison. And I never liked that. I always preferred the earlier World of Warcraft where I was just kind of another soldier, kind of just setting out to kind of help the greater fight as a whole. I liked feeling less special, if that made sense. Because then what was special about me was my own decision. I could actually, get a little into my own personal heady, RP. But, I've certainly played other MMOs that have done this. Like the only other MMO I have really, really, really enjoyed and gotten really bought into is the Old Republic. And that is certainly, I mean, you want to talk about Mass Effect, it was literally made by BioWare and has a dialogue wheel. So those stories those narratives that you play through, depending on what class you are, like there's such a linear narrative.
Definitely. My biggest problem with the BioWare version of an MMO is they still did their BioWare storyline where it's too dangerous, don't go over there. But it wasn't an MMO, so it made no sense. Every single quest was always, you can't do that. That's too dangerous. You'll never survive. And then it's just a tab targeting adventure where you go over the hill, you kill the things, and then you come back and they're like, how did you do this? It's like, well, you do that in a Mass Effect game, you do it 50 times. In an MMO, you do it 120 times. I'm going to notice that things are a little off here.
Yeah. So like, do you attribute this Exodus, as every headline is calling it, like it's probably painting with too broad a brush, but do you attribute WoW's decline and Final Fantasy XIV's growth to just we want our MMO to be social again?
Yes. Yeah, 100%. That is where that critical mass is coming from. Because the story's not for everybody, the gameplay's not for everybody. But the aspects that allow people to have fun and explore and feel like they're breaking the game in that way makes them curious, makes them want to have fun, makes them want to hang out in it. And perhaps one of the, there's small things like people running down the streets have confetti and they can run up and throw confetti on you and then they run away. That's no different than a snowball or another experience that WoW has given you. Nothing really too surprising there. But you get into things like the bards, and your bard class has certain instruments, and you can program in by, moving the little dots, songs. So bards will stand all together, programming, let's say, sexy sax guy into the game, and then 4 bards will be playing. You'll see them on the street, all playing a licensed song that they probably shouldn't be playing, and but they're able to do that sort of thing, which has led to a club culture, in fact, which is one of the most fascinating parts for me. There's housing in this game, and you can buy a house, and as long as there's limited housing, so it's a very special thing to have. As long as you maintain your subscription, you can have access to the house, and it'll be yours. You decorate it. And much like there are Minecraft guides in the world of, you take 2 chairs and by stacking them like this, you get something that looks like a TV. There are specialized people who have learned all the tips and tricks of combining a sword and a chair to make it look like a blender. And now they have a blender in their house for their kitchen area. And people pay in-game money to these designers, these home designers, to enter their home and design their homes for them. because they know all the tricks, which has led to designers that design clubs, nightclubs. And because there's a jukebox in this game, you can put on the in-game music, which is go listen to something as even as old as like the Heavensward soundtrack. There is like a techno piano song. There's your classic, you know the Final Fantasy music. It's very sweeping. It's very big. There's someone going, oh, the whole time. That for sure happens in Final Fantasy. But some fights are done to straight up techno. One song is a straight up ripoff of Power Man 9000. 5000? 9000? Like, worlds collide. Yes.
It's 5,000.
5,000.
Interesting.
And at the end, the guy who sounds just like Power Man, and the boss's name is Sephiroth, which, come on, it's going to get a little confusing for Final Fantasy players even. Sephiroth, but all the same, they do a Sephiroth, and that the music has such huge variety in the game that these jukeboxes work for the types of clubs that people make. And those clubs will also invite the bards to come play music nights. And there's classes called dancers, where people combine attacks that look like they're dancing, so they dance in the club.
Yeah, I think I'm too old for MMOs.
Okay, but what I've just described to you is basically VR chat. And
yes, yeah, it's VR chat with less freedom, but that's probably a selling point because VR chat is looks like actual like a hellish nightmare. But freaking like, yeah, everything you just rattled off, man, like it sounds so deeply unappealing to me. Like I couldn't give less of a flying shit about everything that just left your mouth. However, the social engineering of it from within the community is fascinating.
Yes. And Final Fantasy has given them the tools to play in their game. And perhaps most important for this aspect is Final Fantasy has a very busy and rigorous customer service department. And when players are expressing themselves, having dance nights, dating in game in a ERP sort of way, like they are RPing these characters full blown and living inside this world like you would a VR chat, the customer service is there to take care of them. And if they have a bad experience, if someone takes things too far, if someone ends up being a troll, those reports are actually acted on. And that has fostered an extremely safe environment for people to pretend in. And that can't go unnoticed in comparison to World of Warcraft, where things have felt very automated for a long time and people are feeling like they're not being listened to.
That's interesting. That's something I wish I had firsthand experience with, right? Because I do think of most Blizzard games as being pretty toxic places to exist. I don't really feel like the reporting system works all that great. Funny enough, I think of all the Blizzard games that I regularly interact with, Heroes of the Storm probably has what I would consider the best reporting feature because I get in and people are muted. Like people are actually muted and I'm aware of that fact. So I can tell, oh, this person was probably a giant asshole and is being muted as a result of their assholery. But that doesn't happen in WoW. Like Jesus, the last time I joined an LFR group, well, it wasn't all that different from the first time I joined an LFR group, which is to say it was just like toxic and terrible. You know, if I saw some muted icons in there, maybe I would feel a little better about it. But hearing that Final Fantasy has a reputation for actually acting on reports I mean, I don't know. How sad is it that that's a feature? Like, shouldn't most games act on their reports?
It's expensive is ultimately what it comes down to, which is
we're back to poor small indie company Blizzard.
But they have made decisions that have caused their revenue to grow, such as cutting down on customer service and combining jobs. And when we take those sort of reports and we then combine that with the thought that we're not seeing a lot of these social complaints acted on, or people feeling like they're being misrepresented by a report, that they were dogpiled on, that they don't deserve this report, and they can't actually fight back because the customer service doesn't have time to help them out. That's where they start really butting heads. And in Final Fantasy, they're finding that freedom. There's also stuff that appeals to me as an MMO player, such as there aren't really catch-up mechanics. And when you do raids, you have to do the first raid before you can go to the second raid, before you can go to the third raid. And to some people, World of Warcraft has facilitated a game where you can come and go. I didn't have to do that previous raid. I just wanted to play this one. I'm back now. Don't make me catch up. But when you're building reputation, when you want a mount that means something, when you ride around a world, that sort of rigorous structure means that people can achieve things that others can't. And there's no light version of this, right? There's no LFR version of that mount that they would go get instead. So some are coming for the prestige. Some are just for the story. I absolutely know Final Fantasy players who have said, I'm done. I beat the game. I'm looking forward to the expansion. I experienced the story, and I felt very special in it. I'm out.
That's how I felt leaving the Old Republic. Like when I finished my main character's main quest line, I was like, cool. My job is done here.
Nothing wrong with that.
Which was interesting. The closest I've ever felt to that in World of Warcraft was at the end of Wrath of the Lich King, and I have played up through now. So it's been a while since I felt like I beat World of Warcraft.
The only thing that would be stopping you perhaps is if you got a house. And if you were to unsubscribe, you might lose access to your house. And at that point, you may choose to keep that sub running.
In-game housing has never been a huge concern for me, but I've also spent most of my MMO life playing a game that never offered it. So, yeah, I get that itch has always been scratched for me by other games like Stardew Valley and Animal Crossing. Like those are the type of games I'd rather go and play to have in-game housing. Or recently, I mean, you and I played Valheim, which that really scratched that itch for me.
Right, and that itch scratching when it comes to something like Final Fantasy housing would be a boss drop. That is a painting, a portrait, an item that you would then put up on your wall inside your house. Just as I in Valheim spent way too much time building racks to put all the faces of all the various enemy types we had ever killed up on the wall.
Yeah, but it was cool. And that like for me personally gets into, I think, also wanting like a different kind of gameplay experience as well. Like jumping into another tab targeting MMO. I think I'm too grumpy at this point. I've played, I've seen too much. I've hit tab too many times. And if I'm going to switch whole hog into a game that could command 40 hours of my week, I need it to feel a little more different.
I think that is the basic argument we're going to find for a lot of people. But there are those still pursuing that experience. And you go for a walk around some of these housing districts, you're going to see a lot of unmaxed people. People play this game, discover the social aspects, and say, you know what? I don't care. That's how fresh it is to them, how much these houses and these interactions and making bard songs means.
It makes me really interested. I was already really interested, but it makes me think of that game coming out that's called Palia.
Sure, yeah.
Are you familiar with this one? It's a developer I'm not familiar with. Singularity 6 is who's making it, but it looks like the Animal Crossing MMO. Like without being top down, obviously, but like it's they've made a big deal about talking about how it's not really about combat. Like there's hunting, but it sounds like that's it. It's more about like mining and fishing and hunting. It's all about these kind of like resource gathering things that you can do, so on and so forth. And that the game is much more about building up like your town and befriending your townsfolk, and also, customizing the inside of your house. It seems very interior focused, like Animal Crossing, less like a Valheim where, there's also the exterior construction to be concerned about.
Right, because you had to defend your base from attack.
Yeah, exactly. So this is the type of game that I'm really interested in this game. At first I was kind of turned off when they're like, oh, there's not really combat. I'm like, damn, this looks like a fun game to go and have that. But at the same time, like as someone who recently tried to get back into Final Fantasy and was like, God, I'm just done with tab targeting. Like now I'm this is kind of what I'm whole hog waiting for. Like it looks different enough. It seems more singularly focused on kind of a social game as opposed to something like Final Fantasy, where I feel like I need to spend far too much time with it to get to the social buy-in and understanding of that social space to really care.
Sure, a brand new game that does something very, very well. Ultimately, MMOs are about what you can show to your friends, I think, at the end of the day, and how you get to interact with them. And for many, the barrier to that is gameplay, and a game that you feel like you've already played. My biggest concern, honestly, right now is slightly a scandalous one. I don't know what all these World of Warcraft players have done to Final Fantasy. And there is a honeymoon period that might, reign supreme for a bit. But it's freaky to think that you might go over there and everyone's too in love. It's too reboundy. Everyone's like, oh, I even checked at this. Oh my God, the skybox is so beautiful. And you're like, come on, now you're just finding things that are better than your ex. Like, let's calm it down a little bit. But 2 years ago, I played to level 30 and I played as a tank. I think a warrior was the class. Of course, one character can have all the classes in Final Fantasy, which is kind of the draw of like the dancer class and the bard class. Like you can go quest as a red mage, and that's your fighting class. But you could go back to the club and dance and play a musical instrument just like everybody else. There's also a feature where you can, kind of Sailor Moon-esque blow off your armor and have your casual set underneath, which most people use for underwear. But when I played it 2 years ago, I had this little sprout over my head. Everybody knew I was brand new to the game, and I was a tank, and I queued as a tank into these dungeons. And there was a cinematic to start. Everybody stood still. And even when I finished it, they'd be like, hey, what'd you think of that? I was like, that was a pretty cool little cinematic. Awesome. Here's the path we're going to go. Everybody, I didn't have one bad experience tanking. Everybody let me pull. Everybody was very encouraging. Because maybe I had this symbol over my head that said, I am a noob. Please take care of me. And if other people took better care of you, they would get their own symbol over their head, letting everyone know that this is the kind of person you would want to message. This is a person you can whisper with questions. And that built this social aspect where I felt very, very comfortable going into dungeons I had never played before. An influx of such massive sprouts. Does that have any meaning anymore? Are the World of Warcraft people facilitating joy in the people who are teaching them?
You're worried that the a-hole chain-pulling rogue is now the a-hole chain-pulling whatever the rogue equivalent in Final Fantasy is. I have no idea.
Giving a bad name to all the sprouts.
I think that's a fair concern. I mean, if it does become a concern, I guess that's the true test of their customer service, right? Of their reporting feature. How far do they take it? How much does it keep that type of behavior in line? It's interesting for sure to kind of think about that.
They even had to impose recently they have a free trial through the first expansion. I think it's level 50. They basically had to say the queue is only for paying people now. They had such a huge influx of players that anyone using the free trial account couldn't even enter the queue till paid players were done with their queue.
It certainly is the new WoW. Like it's there. It's there. It wasn't. I don't. There's. You remember the term WoW killer? Like in the early days of WoW. Like I remember the Warhammer MMO being the first one that I heard use that term, and just kind of laughing at it. Like you're a bunch of idiots. Like this isn't gonna just upend WoW overnight. And that ended up being true. Nothing did, but it's been this slow loss of market share. The critical mass has shifted in another game's favor.
And when people believe an MMO to be dead, that's when it truly is dead.
And yet, you can just play the game you feel like playing.
That too. You could just play what you want. Either way, I find it I find it fascinating that of all people, and that's why we're having this conversation today, of all people, Carbot threw in the towel. Somebody who was so closely tied to Blizzard, worked directly with them to promote. There was that, as Heroes of the Storm fans, there was that beautiful video he made for the last BlizzCon line where Overwatch killed Heroes of the Storm. Just art and carnage. But
that was shown at BlizzCon.
Yes, that was an official video that played in front of everybody else.
Yeah, Carbot, we've always been fans. We started doing content so long ago with StarCraft 2, and this is where Carbot cut his teeth doing StarCraft's animation. I love his brand of dissent. God, it's so good. And he was a legit fan. Like, he's not one of these folks that I feel stokes controversy for the clout. Like, seeing him take shots and critique the state of Blizzard games in his little shorts, like that for me, that's been the kind of thing that has affected me and had me kind of go, shit, yeah, I guess WoW isn't the MMO anymore. It's time at the top is over. It's time for WoW's not over. That's ridiculous. But it being the game, yeah, that time has passed.
He recently made that video too, where he described the experience of going through the various expansions, and we were seeing that sadness expressed by Carbot in this video. This one, however, came with a straight up promise that Final Fantasy content to come. Like, this isn't a fart off. This isn't me just saying, hey guys, I did a one-off for the clicks. Final Fantasy will be the new Carbot going forward. Might be some other visits back. He hasn't made any sort of statements like that. But that's a pretty big deal. That is that critical mass when your content creators and the cartoons you're watching are referencing what you should be playing or what you feel like you should be joining.
Yeah. And I'm not saying Carbot is doing this, though, but also, like, how profitable is it to get off of the game that a lot of people aren't playing anymore?
That is...
Like, at a rate.
Yes, that is such a bizarre vehicle of modern times that, not only does a content creator have to follow their passions, they have to follow where the market is. And we're seeing that across tons of streamers, of course.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, if you're a solo gamer, which the majority of creators are, like, that's a really hard decision to make.
I've actually been struggling with it a little myself because I never noticed names of the writers in magazines growing up, gaming magazines. I would always read those and start building my opinion with my limited allowance dollars of sorts. I was going to buy a video game. What should I get? I didn't grow a rapport like you do with an influencer today. Nowadays, I go to a certain YouTube. I have watched enough reviews of them. I know they hate these kind of games, and I kind of like those kind of games. But fine, I'm not going to watch their review on that game. They hate it anyway. But I go to them because I know their tastes. And I've now found and curated my influencers that I agree with.
Yeah, right. Like, their biases, and that's like it's a feature, not an issue.
Right. Exactly.
Like, so like you tend to seek out folks whose tastes align with yours. Which is why, guess what? Wow, content creators switching to Final Fantasy, I'm not going to be watching your stuff anymore because I don't care. But that's the draw, right? And again, it's like I feel perfectly comfortable saying that because I feel like the odd man out. Like, everyone's like, yeah, Final Fantasy. And I'm like, I'm Tommy Lee Jones in The Fugitive, to date myself with a horribly old reference. I don't care.
And that you are allowed to have.
Yeah. So, nonetheless, I'm not really bummed about this. It's wonderful how much time I have to play other games that I am enjoying, not playing World of Warcraft. And to me, it's really exciting to think about a future where WoW is not the top game. Also, a future where WoW has to try.
Yes.
Which, again, broad strokes, like, I've really enjoyed most of modern WoW. I've had a really good time. I've got some really good gaming memories. I don't think it's been as bad as I think a lot of the larger narratives have made it seem. For me, the breaking point is that, like, I think Shadowlands is a good expansion that I just don't want to play anymore. Like the delay certainly played a factor in it, and I don't think that was anyone's fault besides a historic pandemic descending upon the world. But now that they are back and updating, I'm just like, I don't really want to play this. And to me, that was like, okay, cool. That's a new low for me in terms of my interest in the game. Like not wanting to get in on a new patch. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. So yeah, I'd like to see WoW. Like I'd like to see where it goes now that it has a competitor that's bigger than it.
And this can only be healthy for WoW, either in the fact that they ultimately may pull the plug and work on something else in full gusto, a la Fortnite situation. That would be very extreme. But what more would be likely is healthy competition, where you realize you're not on top for free, and the next expansion grows and takes in these social aspects that people have come to love.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's kind of where I'm ending. Like, it's like I don't know. This almost ended up being you and I talking about our feelings on Final Fantasy XIV, but which I wasn't expecting because I barely played it, and I expect it to stay that way.
I've got no problem with that. This is not only a conversation about the aspects that have drawn people to Final Fantasy, but it's also an emotional conversation as people give up a hobby, change their friends even, and move to other areas. Or in your case, discover more time to play video games probably in their back catalog.
That's definitely what I've been doing, or just, grinding more Battlegrounds games. Whatever the case is, yeah. If you dig this is a new project from you and I. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel if you're listening on a podcast application of your choice. I know you can stream it now, but please also subscribe. It's weird telling podcast listeners to subscribe, but it really does help us. And we do have an inbox. You can write in itncast@gmail.com if you want to talk to us about this show and this coverage, where we talk about kind of bigger gaming news topics and how they are, how we're feeling about them, how they're impacting us. So, yeah, thanks so much for watching, for listening, whoever getting the show, everybody. We'll see you next week. Good luck and have fun.